Enjoy the
All right.
webinar, everyone.
Thanks again. Good morning, or maybe afternoon for some of you guys. My name is Patrick LeBlanc. I am a SQL Server and BI architect with Microsoft. I work in the U.S. education vertical. I actually used to work for Pragmatic Works. Great group of guys there. If you ever run into any of them, just punch them in the gut and tell them Patrick's in it. So today we're going to talk about Power BI, and I'm going on a different perspective of Power BI. Most of the presentations, the typical presentations for Power BI is all about the visualizations and building the models and things like that. But I've been doing some research into data refresh and the SSAS Power BI connector. I find those rather interesting because now you have the ability to, refresh your data to keep it as fresh as possible. And also, if you don't want to move any data to the cloud, just very small amounts of data, you can use the SSAS Power BI connector. So let's just get started. So here's the agenda today. We're going to start off talking about data refresh and walk through it kind of very slowly and meticulously. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is a place to enter questions. Feel free to ask questions. And then we'll move over to the SSAS connector and talk about how you set it up and how you get it to working and expose data to your end users. Right? Let's start with the data refresh. So the goal of the data refresh, if you worked with Power BI in the previous version, if you walk through the process of setting up data refresh, you may have gotten a little frustrated because it required a dedicated IT resource, and that required that they download Data Management Gateway on the machine. They had to configure data sources, gateways, and all these different things. You have to do it in a very, very specific way to get it working. Well, now the goal of this new data refresh is to keep your Power BI data sets and dashboards up to date without a dedicated IT resource, which I think the goal of Power BI is to provide users with a self-reliant way to access data, model data, discover data, model data, and visualize data. Why not have a mechanism that allows them to refresh data without waiting for IT? I think this is a great, great goal. So let's just talk about the items that are involved when you refresh data. The very first one is the data source. Where are you getting that data from? Azure, HD Insight, SQL Server, Excel. It could be Oracle. It could be MySQL. Just who knows where the data comes from? That's the very first part. This is where we start. Where am I getting that data from? The next is where am I going to store the data source itself? Am I going to store it in the cloud? Am I going to store it on premises? Next is authentication. How am I accessing this data? Is it basic auth? Is it Windows auth? Is it OAuth? Is it some type of account key because I'm accessing blob storage? Just never know. And probably one of the most critical parts is how often am I going to refresh my data? How much latency can I afford in that data once it's uploaded to Power BI? Is it daily? Is it hourly? Is it every minute? Who knows? Up to you. There has been some improvements in the data refresh. So moving the data refresh, like I said, into a more self-server model, you can have your own personal data sources with a single instance of credentials. No more IT. There's just no more IT right now in this current process. The cloud data sources don't require an on-premises gateway. We support OAuth. There's Power Query support. There's actually a Power Query provider that's baked into the model. And remember, if you've worked with the old one of the things that we touted at Microsoft, you didn't have to open any ports. Kind of true a little bit. If you went and blocked some standard ports, you didn't have to open ports. But if you did not, you did have to open ports. But if you did not block those ports, then you didn't have to open ports. So if you're interested in about that, ping me and I'll be happy to have a conversation with you about the old Power BI. In this new window, you don't have to open any ports. It just kind of works. Right now today, there are some limitations on the data sources that can be refreshed. Right here on the screen, you can see I have a list. So, and you may notice the trend here. All of these data sources currently that are supported by Power BI for refresh are cloud-based data sources. So Azure SQL databases, Blank Queries, Salesforce, Facebook, Marketplace, HD Insight, they're all cloud data sources. There's a few things you need to consider when you want to do data refreshes. Manually enter T-SQL statements are not supported. If you have a need to enter a manual T-SQL statement, create a view. Direct connections through Power Pivot, they won't work with a scheduled data refresh. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Data natively stored in the workbook cannot be refreshed. So what I mean is you can't have data in a worksheet. It must be inside of Power Pivot. So if you just have data in a worksheet, you upload, you build your Power BI reports based on that, you can't refresh that data. When you schedule the data refresh, you need to select an authentication method. It can be basic authentication for SQL databases. It can be OAuth or an account key, things like that. When you connect to the data, you must have a valid account. You need to disable the pop-up blockers on your browser. Performance vary across data sources because, to be honest, we don't know what your underlying data source looks like when you run those queries or whatever it is you try to get the data. So, I mean, the data is the pipeline for the data refresh is built, to get that data as fast as possible. But that also depends on the query that you're sending now. If you need to upload a version of the workbook, be sure to overwrite the original one with the same name, because if you don't, things just won't work as you expect. Okay. I actually did this presentation for a group of PFEs at Microsoft, I guess about 2 weeks ago now, and right before I did that presentation, I added this slide because I just found out about it, and I still haven't gone through. This is a lot of text on this slide. This is not how I usually write my slides, but I haven't updated it yet. I need to make some really finite bullets and just kind of sum this up instead of all this long text. But what this is saying basically is if you have a workbook stored on OneDrive, your data is refreshed from OneDrive about once every hour. And so your workbooks, your data sets, any changes you make will be updated. And so I put a link in here that talks about even more information about scheduled data requests. So how does this work? The first step is provisioning. Okay? Every time a new user registers with Power BI, the Azure Data Movement Service, or ADMS, is provisioned. This is used to combine with used to be combined with Power BI. All of it used to be in the past. What we realized, what the product team realized, was that it's more than Power BI that needs access to these various data sources. Things like Azure ML, for example. Now everything is separated out, and when a user signs in, they're provisioned. This only happens the very first time. In other words, ADMS captures that user's identity and stores it in a secure store. If you've ever worked with SharePoint on premises and you set up Power Pivot or Performance Point or Power View, you've encountered this secure store before, a similar type of secure store. Once it's provisioned, a data source, the data source is added, for your refresh. You upload a workbook and the data source is added. You have to enter your credentials for the scheduled data refresh. And this means that if it's OAuth, the user will need to enter the credentials and the tokens are returned, and the tokens last for a certain amount of time and things like that. The token is cached and the user can obtain the data from their third-party providers. If it's basic auth, you need to use a username and a password. There's no prompting required. Once a user is provisioned, Power BI knows who you are, and when a user uploads a workbook and they want to refresh the workbook, the data source is registered, the user will need to enter the credentials. If this is an OAuth scenario, like I said before, the tokens are obtained, and so that's pretty much the beginning of the process. The next part of this is the scheduling, the actual data refresh. And so this is the flow for the cloud refresh that you see, meaning that the data is in Azure or some platform as a service. For an on-premises, the flow is a little differently and has not been fully defined and disclosed as of this presentation right now. So I don't know all of the details about how it's going to work for on-premises data sources, but for cloud-based data sources, this is the process, okay? In the older service, everything was based on SharePoint and Excel. There was a big dance that had to be done between SharePoint, Power BI, and Excel to make everything happen. Now it is a standalone service that's completely decoupled from SharePoint. The Power BI team built their own scheduler that lives in Power BI. Now, this scheduler, don't worry, don't be afraid. There was a scheduler that was already there. They're not starting any of this stuff from scratch, so they're leveraging a lot of the existing things and making this work. Everything is managed from within the scheduler, and then there's an additional ADO.NET provider that made for the ADMS process. So the first thing that happens is the connection string for the data set has to be refreshed. But it does not contain the username and password. That's already stored in the secure credential store. And so you don't have to worry about that part during the registration process. The metadata, this connection string contains like the metadata, the database name, the location, the schema name, things like that. That's in that connection string. This is bounced into ADMS saying this is the user that's making the call. So it synchronizes, matches all this up, make sure that the connection string is registered with that user. And then the ADMS checks the secure store, to see whether or not everything's matched up. Once this is verified, the query is sent, and you see this Power Query provider, and I'm going to talk about some restrictions on how you have to set up your workbooks to get this to refresh or access these data sources. But this Power Query provider contains a list of all the possible providers, and most of those are the cloud-based sources. And then so it establishes which one, then it sends a call down to the corresponding data source, gets the data back, and then it processes it all the way back. Okay? After ADMS sends the query to the data source, which could be Facebook, Salesforce, Azure SQL Database, whatever, it's executed and the results are returned. And before the data is actually sent, a lot of very complex stuff happens, like compression and optimizations, and then finally it's sent back to Power BI. Kind of complicated, but just the gist of it is that when you sign up for Power BI, it captures all your information. We use the Power Query provider to determine which source we're going to get the data from, issue that query, get it back, and send it back. Kind of a complex dance, but it just works. There's not a whole bunch. And I'm going to show you how this works, and you'll see how simple it is from a graphical user interface perspective. So before we go there, though, I want to point out one thing. When you upload that workbook, when you're authoring your workbook, you must follow this flow. First, you must import data with Power Query. You can't import it directly into Power Pivot or Power Pivot or into a worksheet. It must come from Power Query. Then you load it into Power Pivot. Then you upload it to Power BI. Then you can schedule data refresh. If you skip Power Query, it's not going to work. I'm going to demonstrate this to show you this so you can see. Okay. Coming soon, so another way that data can be refreshed is through Azure Stream Analytics, and it's currently available in a private preview. But if you want, I think you can email somebody to get that access to the private preview. But you can, Azure Stream Analytics, you will have the ability to push data directly to Power BI, and it'll constantly give you real-time insights into your different data points. So let's jump into a demo here. And let's see, I'm going to move this. Let's see, can I get this out of the way here? There we go. Okay. So over on the Power BI site, let's go over to a Power BI site here. So if you just go to PowerBI.com, if you guys have never seen PowerBI.com, if your organization has any type of Office 365, just click sign in. You should be able to log in. If not, it's possible that your Office 365 administrator turned off the ad hoc subscriptions, and in the FAQ on the site, it tells them how to re-enable it. If you don't, just enter your work email address, and then it'll work on setting everything up for you. Microsoft has everything federated up for us, so I simply click my sign in, and I land on my Power BI site. And so here's a dashboard that I've created, and it is sourced from a workbook that is Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power BI. And so I have these workbooks that I created. And I'm going to start with the Power Pivot one. And let's close this. I'm going to start with the Power Pivot one right here. And so in this workbook, if you go to Power Query and open up, say, Show Pane, you'll see right here that I don't have any workbook queries. If I go to Power Pivot, you'll notice that I have some data loaded in the Power Pivot. Just give it a second and it'll open up. While that's launching, I'm going to go ahead and open the other one. And so you can see here, I launched Power Pivot and there's my state data. Okay? And then I have another workbook that I created. If I go to Power Query and say Show Pane, you see that I have one query there, and then I go to Power Pivot, and then you can see my data in Power Pivot. Once I'm done creating these, I go to my Power BI site that I have, choose Get Data, and select Excel Workbook, and click Connect. From there, I can import data from my local machine, from my personal OneDrive, or my business OneDrive. Remember, if you have workbooks stored in OneDrive, there's certain things that happen automatically for you if you follow the right protocol of building that workbook. I'm going to choose mine just for my local machine, and once you do that, if you have reports already built in that workbook, when you upload it to Power BI, it'll add a data set, and so you can see here at the bottom, I have one for my Power Pivot right there, and one for my Power Query. So I uploaded those two workbooks, and so because I have a Power Pivot model in it, it created a data set for me. And then if I had any reports, and I just happen to have a report for each one, it'll create reports automatically for me in those Power BI. And then I can open those reports and create dashboards and everything. This is not a design session, but that's how it will work. Remember when I said you have to follow the prescription about loading data into Power Query, discovering data with Power Query, modeling data with Power Pivot, visualizing it with Power View. If you don't follow those steps, like for example in this workbook with Power Pivot, I did not. If I click on Schedule Data Refresh, you'll notice it's kind of dimmed out here, but what it says is you can't schedule data refresh because the data set contains a data source that's not yet supported. And so going directly to Power Pivot, it doesn't even give you the ability to refresh a data set. However, if I follow the prescription, right, if I follow that path that I outlined earlier, everything gets enabled. You choose yes, refresh data. You can refresh data daily or weekly, and then you can specify, what range you want your data to refresh in, and be sure to select your time zone, okay? And then you must enter your credentials. I've already entered my username and password because this data is coming from a SQL Azure database. So once you enter your credentials, then you can refresh your data. We'll go here, and if I click on the little ellipsis and zoom in, you see you have some options. If I click Explore, it's just like opening the workbook connected in Power View. It opens up a little Power View field list, and I can start designing my reports. I can rename this, I can schedule a data refresh, or I can refresh it now. So let me show you how the refresh now works. I'm going to go out here. I have a little database. I'm going to insert some data here. Insert some data into my Azure SQL database. So I've inserted 6 rows. And if you take a look at my dashboard, where are you, little fella? So my dashboard, there's only 4 states, California, Florida, New York, and Texas. Same thing on my map. If I go ahead and refresh this now, it takes a few seconds. So you can see up here it's saying, hey, I'm refreshing for you, Patrick. I'm refreshing. Don't rush me. It'll take just a few more seconds over. And then what you'll see is that you'll get more bars, and you'll also get more dots on my map here once the refresh completes. So there you go. So you can see I have more bars and I have more maps. This can only be done in 5-minute increments. If I tried to refresh again, it wouldn't work. So you have to wait 5 minutes before you can refresh the data. So the largest amount of latency is 5 minutes when you get data up to Power BI. So after that, it just kind of works. All right? Okay. So again, if you have any questions or comments, post them on in the GoToMeeting. And so that's just about how refresh works. Like I said, it's only cloud-based data sources at this point. But there's lots more to come. They're rapidly adding new data sources every day. All right. Let's jump back over to our slide deck and move on to the next section, which is the SSAS connector. Now, to me, this is one of the best features of Power BI because a lot of my customers have made large investments in developing tabular and multidimensional models. And instead of using Excel as the authoring tool for the data discovery and data modeling, you leverage your existing investments in analysis services, and you connect directly to it from Power BI. So there's some prerequisites that you must adhere to before you can get this to work. You must have the .NET Framework 4.5.1 or later running on the machine where you install the connector. The Power BI Analysis connector can't be installed with the Data Management Gateway from the previous version of Power BI. The analysis services must be domain joined. It can't be just some analysis server you installed on your machine. It has to be domain joined. They don't have to be. So the analysis services connecting that, they must be in the same domain, but they don't have to be on the same machine. So you can have AS running on one machine, and you can have the connector running on another. If you are using an on Microsoft.com email address, you need to sync your Azure Active Directory some kind of way, either using password sync or using some type of federation to get it all synced up. There is an alternative that I'll talk about, and there's been a couple of great blog posts written about it. So this is an excellent solution, like I said, for harnessing your existing investments. If you have very large tabular models out there, you can connect directly to them. So right now today, you can only direct connect to tabular models, but multidimensional models are definitely on the roadmap. There's no need to move any on-premises data to the cloud. It just stays in your on-premises queue. It's optimized for performance. You can reuse your existing permission model, fine-grained permissions flow between the cloud and Power BI, and the tiles are refreshed periodically. So this is how this works. So you go out to Power BI, and so instead of walking through it, because it does take a little bit, you click on the little gear in PowerBI.com, you choose Analysis Services Connector Preview, and you download it, and you agree to the EULA here, and then you start walking through the steps. You establish a link to your Power BI tenant. So when you start configuring this, you provide credentials where you in your Power BI tenant. So however you sign into Power BI, those are the credentials you would use, because that's where it's going to expose that Analysis Server connector. Once you do that, then you need to provide an account that has administrative permissions to your analysis server running in tabular mode. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. And for you guys that are familiar with SharePoint and how SharePoint 2013 and Power View and reporting services and Power Pivot, how it worked with security if you want to get around Kerberos, this works in a very similar way. And I'll explain it in detail. After you do that, you provide the name that you want this to appear in the list of available models on Power BI, a description, and then a friendly error message. And then you click close, because it gets all connected. And let me, while I'm going through the slides, I'm going to get mine open here. Let's see here. Yeah. Let's just make sure it's open. It does take a little bit to open. And then once it's set up, you simply click to get data, select Analysis Services Source, and then your end users, if they have permissions to a cube, they'll see a list of cubes available for them in that particular screen. And then you start designing your reports like they're any other data source. Just that simple. So how does this work? Right? How does this work under the covers? So the way this works is that a user signs in, and the provision process is very similar to what you saw with the data refresh out there. And one second, having some, my screen's not refreshing. And so what you would do is once it's provisioned, there's an Azure Service Bus, and this is just a cloud-based tool that we have out there that's part of Azure today. And so before a user can connect, you got to get the Analysis Server connector configured. And then the first time this is set up, you log into your Power BI account, like I said. Then your account is similar to how it's provisioned with the data refresh. It's all provisioned into ADMS. And then the effective username runs the query of the person that is logged in. And so instead of it flowing down, and instead of it only uses it uses that administrative account to establish the connection to the queue, and then it uses your username to run the queries. And the Analysis Server connector acts as a proxy between your Power BI tenant and your tabular model. And so once you issue the queries, it knows who you are because of it populates that effective username property. And so when the queries are issued, it actually uses that administrative account that you supply when you set up the Power BI connector to just make the connection, just like SharePoint, and Power View work. It uses that account to establish the connection, and then it reverts over to your account to issue the query. Then it just sends it back up. And so the service bus is provisioned to facilitate the secure SSL channel. And so when it gets the data, it compresses it, encrypts it, and it sends it back over that SSL channel to through the service bus. And then it surfaces the data up in Power BI. And so Power BI requests the data and gets the Azure Service Bus info, okay? The request is sent to the Azure Service Bus, which in turn does all the work, right? This is when the query returns the data from the on-premises analysis services. What's really important here is the effective username. And so I've had so many conversations with customers going, hey, this is just not working. And I'm going to show you how I think you can detect what the problem is and why it's not working, okay? So like I said, the effective username is the key. And so I added this slide because I wanted to explain this. So when you go to Power BI and you connect to one of those sources, this is a proxy, right? Your analysis server is the proxy. The connection is established with that username that you provided when you set up the Power BI SSAS connector. So you can see here, hey, it's going, I'm making the connection. Once that connection is created, the effective username. All the queries are run under the context of the logged in user because that property holds that username. Runs the query, then that service bus will establish this SSL and compress that data and send it back up to Power BI, and then it visualizes the data. That data is compressed and it sits right behind the little tile, the little chart that you create. When I did this presentation the first time, somebody goes, "What happens if you share the dashboard?" So unfortunately, right now, if I share the dashboard, any data that I have access to, the person that I share it with will also see that data. So the effective username does not flow through. They're working on correcting that right now. Okay. Another thing is that if you have an Excel workbook that is connected to a tabular model and it has Power View reports in it, that will also work too. So if you already have a connection to that CubeUp, you just need to make sure it all matches up. That'll work, and you can start engaging with it the exact same way. So this is there's three different scenarios on how you would get this to work, right? The first one is federation and Active Directory and ADFS. So if you have all that set up in your environment today, this is just going to work for you out of the box. You can also use password sync, where you're syncing your Office 365 tenant and your Active Directory up, keep those passwords synced. And then there's an alternate process that you can use, which is, I forget the guy's name who wrote a great blog post on setting up this alternate UPN, but I'm going to show you this. The first two are used in production scenarios, and I was telling our host at the beginning of the session that I'm creating a session just around how you configure this and how you set this up for Power BI. And so hopefully Pragmatics Works will invite me back. You guys give me decent reviews on this presentation to do the presentation on how you get this working in your environment. But if you don't want to walk through all these steps, there's an alternate one. I can't say that I would use it for production, but it's definitely a good way that will allow you to kick the tires and test this out and make sure this works in your environment. So, as my favorite part is demos, and there's a lot of demos. Probably have about 15-20 minutes to talk here, and then I'll leave some time at the end for some questions if anyone has questions or comments. Okay, so first let's start by going out to Power BI. In Power BI, you can see down here at the bottom, I have a couple of connections. So I have one that's labeled alternate UPN and one that's named domain connect. Okay. And to get these, your end users actually don't have to do anything. This is where it requires a dedicated IT resource. Someone from IT needs to build a tabular model. Someone from IT needs to grant them permissions to a cube. And once those permissions are granted, they just need to provide them with the steps to connect to the cube. So what you would do is click Get Data, choose SQL Server Analysis Services. It's going to you'll land you on this page and click Connect. What it's going to do is, this is my Microsoft account, so it's going to go find all of the analysis services that are exposed in our Microsoft domain. And so obviously I don't have access to any of these. You can search for the ones you want. I know I created two, and you can see right there, there's the two I create. If I click one, it's going to go and query it and find out. It's going to do some discovery calls on that AS box, and it's going to show me the cubes that I have access to. Once it shows, the cubes that I have access to, I select the one I want and click Connect. Once I do that, that cube will show up in the list of available data sets back on Power BI, back over here, right here. Okay? But let me show you. So let's say, for example, I'm an end user and I needed access to a different database on that server, for example. How would I get access to it? And so I remember when I first saw this and I clicked Connect. This is not the one I want to connect to. Sorry. Let me do this one more time. Sorry about all the clicking. And so if I wanted to, so I email my IT group and I say, hey, I need access. I'm looking at the list of available sources here, and this particular run is running on a SQL server that's running in a VM in the cloud. And so I see I have access to these three databases, but I need access to some other database. How would they go about giving them access to it? What they would do is go on to the analysis server or use some tool that they use to manage security for their database. And so I want to give them access to this MVA Dynamic Security database. If a role doesn't exist, you would create a role. So you can see I have a role in my tabular model. Then go to Memberships, and I can add this user. So I'm going to add this user to this particular database. this particular cube, check the name. So I'm going to add that user right there, and I'll tell you about this user. I'm going to explain this user to you in just a little bit. Click OK, and click OK. And now that user has read access to that entire cube. And if I come back here and I tell the user, go ahead and, that's not what I meant to do, reconnect to the cube. And once they reconnect, here we go. That cube, that once they connect to the analysis server, not the cube, reconnect to the analysis server. Once they reconnect, it just automatically shows up for them. So not much for the end user to do. This is, you definitely need a dedicated IT resource to get this going. Somebody that's familiar with, building tabular models, securing tabular models. But once you have this process set up, it's simple as granting people access to cubes, and then they just land here. Once they find a cube they want, they select it and click connect. And then what's going to happen is you'll see down here that it begins to add that cube as a data source. Okay. Now that particular this configuration is actually in the third tier, the third scenario that I have. Where are you? Scenario. It's actually in the third scenario. It's the alternate UPN. So to set this up, like if you really want to kick the tires, I'm logged in as my Microsoft account. And what I did was I went out to my domain controller, and I went to Active Directory, Domain, and Trust. And if you right-click on the top level, select Properties, and then I added, you can see I have a couple here. One for my friend Julie Postmano, her domain, and I have one for Microsoft.com because her and I were doing some testing. And so I added those accounts. I added these alternate UPNs, and what this allows me to do is create accounts pleblanc at Microsoft.com. And so once I add pleblanc at Microsoft.com as a domain account, then I can grant it permissions to, it allows me to add pleblanc at Microsoft as a user in my Active Directory, and then I can add it as a user on my analysis services. Once it's on my analysis services, then it works. If I didn't do that, if I didn't have the ability to do that, what it's doing is it's passing that context of that user down to the cube, and it's trying to access data using that user account, and that user account doesn't exist in my domain. And so remember I talked about that Microsoft identity on Microsoft.com. Same thing, right? That account doesn't have any permissions to your local Active Directory unless you go through some process like this or set up password sync or federated to get those accounts, to get everything synced up between your on-premises AD and your Active Directory, your Office 365 AD. Okay? So that just works. It's pretty straightforward like that. And so the next thing is you can start creating reports. So I'm already connected to two different cubes. I'm connected to one, they're the exact same cubes in Power BI. So I just click Explore. So if we go here and we just choose one of them, so I'll choose the alternate UPN one and click Explore, and it'll take a few seconds, and then it'll fire up the Power View list here. And then if I go back over here and do the same thing for the one that's domain connected and click Explore. So this is what your end users would do. They click Explore, and then it just will launch this field list, very similar to what you see, in Power View and SharePoint, Power View and Excel. It launches the field list, and then if I, issue, say, let's start building the table here. So I click this, and then choose, some additive value or something like that. So I'm building a report. If I go over to the server that hosts that data warehouse, that cube, look at the profile here. What you'll see is that, remember, this is my local, this is a VM that I have running that's joined to EduDemo. That's the name of the domain. But I set up that alternate UPN, and I gave pleblanc Microsoft.com permissions to that cube. You can see here that, let me make this a little smaller just so you can see everything within the context. And so you can see that I'm connecting to EduDemo as pleblanc, but it's actually issuing the query down here using this effective username. So you can see right there. So it's issuing the query as pleblanc at Microsoft.com, and it's only returning the data that I have access to. And so that's done by setting up that alternate UPN. You can do, like I said, you can use one of the other scenarios to make this work, and I'll show you a demonstration of that also. But what's critical here, when you set up this trace template, all you need to do is use the query begin and end events. And I'm going to write a blog and post this trace template out. And so use the query begin and end events, and then make sure that you select the request properties column name, because if you don't, it won't return the necessary XMLA so you can see that information. And then I just added a filter on this trace for the Power BI application. So this is a great way to monitor activity in your Power BI tenant. Really, really easy, really straightforward to get things going. Alternatively, if I'm connected to my, here we go, my Microsoft one. So this is connected to my domain account. So this is the analysis service that's running on my local machine. That's part of Microsoft Domain. I have the exact same profile running here, but you can see that I'm connected to our North America domain with P. LeBlanc, and it's the same effective username because I'm an administrator on my queue and it passes the exact same one. If there was somebody else that was in that domain and I gave them permissions to a queue on the server, their account will come through and they will be able to connect because we're all part of the same domain. Okay, and it just works that way. And then if you take that same, you take a workbook, you can take a workbook, for example, and it works very similar to what we did in the cloud. Let's say I had another analysis server. Let's not use this one right here. Let's say I have this analysis server that's running locally, and there's a workbook that I created. Let me point out one thing. When you build those workbooks, so there's one thing. Remember I talked about the prescription, the steps you need to take to do data refresh, Power Query, Power Pivot, and then you can optionally create Power BI reports. Those are the steps you need to take to get them to refresh on premises. If you want to restore, so you can take a Power Pivot model and restore it to a tabular model, taking a little excursion here. And once you restore that workbook, so let me show you what I mean. So I can say restore from Power Pivot and go browse and then just locate a workbook. So I have a workbook here. I'm going to choose this one and click OK and restore it as U.S. states, something like that, and click OK. And it will take a few seconds and it will restore this database out to my model here. If you follow the prescription, Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View, it's not going to work as cleanly as you want. You'll have to make some change some things if you try to restore it this way. But if you just go directly to Power Pivot, you can restore this workbook. And now if I go out to my Power BI site, let's go out to my Power BI site and go over to Get Data, connect to Analysis Services, click Connect, only find the ones that I created, and then choose my local one. You can see I call that guy local tabular. That database that I restored, because I'm an administrator on it, skip a little bit. There you go. So now that database is also available to me. So there's lots of different things. Wow, I'm finished 20 minutes ahead of time. I'm sorry. So there's lots of different things that you can do to configure this and set this up and walk through this. And so if you guys have any questions or comments or you want to reach out to me, let me see. I don't think I put my email address up here anywhere on this slide deck. Let me put my email address up. Right there. So the first time I delivered this, I went way over because I had tons of questions. This time I'm about 20 minutes earlier than I anticipated. Well, about 5 minutes. It's about a 45-minute presentation. So if you guys have any questions or comments about this, please feel free to email me. I just had to start a new blog site because I was telling our host that my site got hacked, and so I had to redo everything. And so I'm going to post some blogs out about all this stuff that I've talked about today. I will give the presentation to Pragmatic Works and I can share it with you guys. Thank you guys for joining. Sorry that I finished so 5 minutes early. If you have any questions, I can stick around for the next 20 minutes or so answering questions.
Let's see what we've got. If there's someone wanted to know if what you're doing is also applicable to multidimensional cubes.
It's on the roadmap. By the time this goes, that's a great question. So the question was, is this applicable to multidimensional cubes? So right now today it's only available for tabular, but by the time it goes to production it will be available for multidimensional. But not today. It's not supported today, not yet.
Okay, let's. Someone wants to know where your blog is located, like what the URL is.
Yeah, so there's only one post up there right now. You just go to patrickdleblanc.com And my blog is syndicated also, so you see it right there. So you'll see about 3 or 4 more by the end of the week. I'm just trying to get everything republished because I got hacked. Just go to patrickbblog.com, or if you go to SQLServerCentral.com, my blog is syndicated, and all the old content is there. And so if you just go to SQL Down South on SQL Server Central, you can see all of my old content here on SQL Server Central.
Okay. Someone wants to know, when will DAX be supported?
DAX. They need to elaborate. DAX in the Power BI Designer. DAX is supported on Tableau models. Are they talking about the Power BI Designer?
In Power BI Designer, yes.
So it's coming. I can't give them a specific date. We're not authorized to release the date yet, but it's pretty soon.
A couple people again are asking about the presentation. As Patrick said, yes, he will get that to us, and we will hopefully maybe be able to do a blog about it with his presentation.
Matter of fact, Liz, I'm going to email it to you right now.
Okay.
I just need to remove a couple of slides right there. I was looking at them. I need to delete those before I send them. And I will send this to you here in just a bit.
Okay. Someone asked, can they create folder structure on data source report in Power BI site?
Great question. You can't do it right now, but that is on the roadmap. Send it to you, Liz, because I will definitely forget by the time I hang up.
All right.
I'll have you in my email. There we go. Liz Hamilton. Bam.
Thank you. Someone wants to know if there's any export options.
No, not right now. There isn't. No export options. These guys are asking really good questions. Let me point out something though. These are really good questions. And if there's something that you want to see in Power BI, once you get signed into Power BI, there is a little up here, a little question mark. Go to that question mark. What should we build next? Okay. Click on what should we build next. The product group monitors this daily. And so you just enter your idea, or look for your idea, DAX. So let's type DAX. Go out and look for, see DAX editor in the Power BI Designer. Enter that and then vote for it. Vote and say, yeah. So look, see DAX in the Power BI Designer. That's planned. This is really important part of our plan, Marco, the ability to create da-da-da-da. You can see they're working on it. And so this is coming really soon. If there's anything else you want to see and you don't find it in this list, post it here. They're watching. This guy, Will Thompson, is the product manager for Power BI. And he watches this thing like a hawk.
Okay. Someone wants to know, is it supported SSRS, PPS, Visio services?
Is what supported? I'm sorry, Liz. I
don't know. Any support? Anyone? Well, we'll go to the next question because maybe they'll answer. Any support for on-prem?
For the Power BI client, any of the stuff that like on-premises data or Power BI itself. So Power BI itself is not supported on-prem. You can use SharePoint 2013 and do Power BI reports inside of SharePoint 2013. If they're talking about on-premises data refresh, that's not supported right now.
Okay. Someone wants to know, if I create an SSAS tabular data set in Power BI, can I share this data set with others?
Create an SSAS data set in Power BI. So if I add this data set here, can I share the data set? You cannot share data sets. The only thing you can share right now is dashboards. What you would need to do is give them access to that cube, that tabular model that's running on your server. So you give them add their domain, and like I did in the demonstration, you give them read permissions or whatever permissions you want. They would choose get data, and then they would connect to that analysis server.
Okay.
Really good questions.
That's all the questions that have come through so far.
All right. I was able to answer them. All right.
Yeah.
No stumping the chump.
Again, people keep asking about the slides, and again, I'll say Patrick has sent them to me, and we will post them on our blog site, blog.pragmaticworks.com. You can get to it on our website, and I'll also post it on our social media pages when it's available.
I just sent them to you because I will forget. Great. Thank you so much for having me, Liz. And as soon as I finish the other presentation, I'll make sure I thought that this one, I had so many cutoffs the last time that It lasted an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, yeah, so I'm sorry it's a little short. I didn't
Nope,
realize.
that's not a problem. I think everybody got what they needed to get out of it and you answered a lot of good questions.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.